Okay, so Deborah's going to do our land acknowledgement.
Okay. This land acknowledgement statement acknowledges with gratitude the Stockbridge Munsee Band of Mohican Indians, or the people of the waters that are never still, the original inhabitants and stewards of the land now known as the town of Chatham. Today, due to past federal forced removal policies, the Stockbridge Munsee community resides in northeastern Wisconsin. As climate leaders and proponents of actions to heal our earth, we are indebted to and indebted to the ancestral wisdom and deep connections to the natural world of the Stockbridge Munsee community.
Thank you, Deborah.
Sure.
All right. So welcome to Crash Course in Civics, aka Civics 101, Part 1. There is certainly a lot to learn because New York is famous for having a particularly Byzantine government with many, many levels and layers. So today, the goal of this session is not to overload you, but we really want to give everyone the same foundational basic familiarity with the structures and roles in government. So we're going to go into a separate second section of this after a short break. And that will focus on the processes of like, how do you actually get your projects done through local government? So I know some of you may already be familiar and have been working with your local governments for some time. Please be thinking of your most valuable tips that you could share in our discussions. After this part 1, we'll take some Q&A. So jot down any questions along the way. We'll do Q&A after part 1. We'll take a 5-minute break. We'll do part 2, and then we'll do some more Q&A after that. So why are we spending time talking through how local government works? As you all know, Climate Smart Communities at its core is a municipal program. So you are really working as a volunteer under the auspices of your local government, whether town or village. And why am I going to go into some of the higher levels of New York government? We want you to be familiar with who is setting the policies at the state level, who's controlling grant money and other support services. So that's why this is all really important stuff to know. So let's start up at the top at the state level. As we all know, there's our capital in Albany. So there's the New York State Governor and the State Assembly, the state legislature. This is where important new legislation has been passed at the state level. These are the bodies that create and pass the statewide legislation that sort of trickles down to our local level. So most notably, recently, they passed the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And I put in a link here for kind of an explainer article that I think will be handy. I'll share these slides after our presentation today, so you can go back and check out that link. The CLCPA is nation leading in terms of its aggressive climate change goals. So that's New York State, along with, say, California, Washington State. These are really leading our country in terms of setting examples of how to work on climate change and creating some of the influence of creating market incentives for progress. I think we all saw on the news recently that California is going to be banning internal combustion engine cars. So because we, New York, California, we're such big states, we can really kind of throw our weight around when setting some climate policy. So there's certainly more to discuss about the state level, but I want to keep moving and bring it back to how that relates to our work in the Climate Smart Communities program. So up at the state level, we have kind of this acronym soup of different departments and agencies that oversee areas and can provide grants to folks like us down here working at the local level. The CSC program itself is brought to us by 7 different state departments. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of do a pop quiz and see who can shout out what the acronym stands for. So how about this one? DOS, anybody?
Department of State,
Department of
Yeah.
State.
Yeah. Okay, so DOH, anybody?
Department of Health,
Yes. DOT.
Department of Transportation,
Yeah. PSC.
Public Service Commission.
No,
Okay, close.
close.
Public Service Commission.
It's the Public Service Commission. How about NYPA, NYPA?
New York Power Authority,
Yes. DEC.
Department of Environmental Conservation,
Yes. So this is one of the main ones we typically hear a lot about because CSC, the grants that that CSC offers run through DEC. Mark Lowry and Dazzle Ekblad are the people who manage climate smart communities, and they're out of the Office of Climate Change. Mark Lowry was actually one of the founding people who developed the original CSC program, which launched back in 2009. Okay, last one, finally.
New York State Energy Resource and Development Association.
I think it's New York State Energy Research and Development Authority,
Oh, you're right, yeah.
but really close. Meg, superstar, thank you. Yeah, so this is the last of those 7 state agencies involved in climate smart communities. And this agency is interesting because it's funded by fees through the utility, the electrical utilities. And NYSERDA powers a lot of the grants that have to do with reducing your energy usage and transitioning to renewables. And NYSERDA also has this other program, which we've spoken about, the Clean Energy Communities, or CEC, often confused with CSC. And as I mentioned in our orientation, there's a lot of overlap and ways to get points for both programs. So that's something we will continue to talk about throughout Local Champions. So that's the state level. Now let's talk about regions. When it comes to economic development and planning, this is the map that, that the government thinks about, okay? Down in our area, Columbia and Greene are in the capital region, while Ulster and Dutchess are in the mid-Hudson region. And so why is this important? When reviewing applicants for CSC grants, these regional economic development councils actually, though, they have a say in who gets the CSC grants. So might be a good idea for you to go check out their websites and see who's in charge. Maybe tune into a meeting if they're having a meeting on economic development opportunities and get to know how they work. In terms of planning, Climate Smart Communities, NYSERDA, and other agencies kind of feed out funding to local NGOs to be their regional resources for municipalities. So for planning, CEC and CSC support, for example, we have the Hudson Valley Regional Council, which works with the Mid-Hudson region municipalities. And then you have the Capital District Regional Planning Commission that helps up in the capital region. And I think you've already met, or we will be introducing you to partners from the Hudson Valley Regional Council. And I think you've already met Tara and Haley from Capital District Regional Planning Commission. Tara and Haley are the ones who are helping Bill and Deb with their bronze filings. So these are the great partners for us because they're really already kind of plugged into the way that funding flows from the state in the form of funding these regional experts who are there to help you with their technical expertise. Another way to think about how the state organizes work and funding is to think about watersheds. Has anybody ever noticed these little blue fish signs as you're driving around?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is the logo for the Hudson River Estuary Program, which was created through the DEC. It was created in 1987 through the Hudson River Estuary Management Act. And the program focuses on the tidal Hudson and adjacent watershed, from the federal dam up at Troy all the way down to the Verrazano Narrows in New York City. So it's pretty massive, right? And it's super important to the state. And this is a really good organization, the Hudson River Estuary Program, another great organization for you all to be aware of, particularly if your municipality is on the Hudson River front. So Margaret, for instance, with Catskill Village being right on the riverfront, and therefore really affected by sea level rise and storm surge and flooding and that sort of thing. But I will say, I don't think all of us are in the Hudson River watershed here in our local champions cohort. I actually think Stacy Amenia is in the 10-mile river watershed, which is maybe part of this larger Housatonic watershed. So Stacy, I recommend maybe you could chat with Chow, our former local champ from Northeast, about the Housatonic watershed group. And then Teddy, I was also looking at Stanford. I think Stanford is partly in the Hudson River watershed and partly in the Housatonic 10-mile. Is that right, Teddy? Do you happen to know?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can check. That sounds about right, though.
Yeah. So I
believe now I don't know. I think also the Wappinger Creek had a watershed that runs through Stanford.
yeah, but that might run into the Hudson. So that
Okay.
might be part of the larger Hudson watershed. Yeah, there's lots of little tributaries that run into the larger watershed. So I do urge you to look into these watershed groups, or the Hudson River Estuary Program. They really do a lot of great work, and they're really trying to dovetail with the climate smart community actions around, especially around resiliency, and land use and conservation and those sorts of actions. Okay, so next we have counties. Can anybody guess how many counties are in New York State?
62.
Wow, well done. Ding, ding, ding. Yes, 62 counties. Our partners, the Cornell Cooperative Extensions, have a location in almost every county. Some are combined, I think, because of lower population. So we have Columbia Green as a combined agency. And some of the county level funding for climate smart communities really flows through the Cornell Cooperative Extensions, the CCEs. They do a lot of work with agricultural communities and industry locally. They offer all sorts of learning programs and community programs. They host 4-H programs, for example, and they have a lot of training for volunteers who want to get involved and develop their own expertise. So they've really become sort of the leading local experts in the Climate Smart Communities program, and that's why we've partnered with them for each of you in this Local Champions program. So there are these 4 counties that the Local Champs pilot, the Local Champs program is focusing on, that you all are from. Some of the counties are further along than others. And what's interesting is that they, from county to county, there's a little variation in how the county level government works. So, you know, most of our counties have a county executive and a county legislature. Columbia is different because it doesn't have a county executive or a legislature. It just has a board of supervisors made up of its own town supervisors, which is interesting, but it's different. And in Ulster, they actually have a special office of the environment, so with staff. So I just mentioned this because as you get further along with CSC and CEC, you might find that it's helpful if your county is kind of pitching in and helping to support its municipalities. And if it's not, that might be something that you want to raise to your county legislator, if you have one, or your town supervisor that's on the board of supervisors, if it's Columbia County. Because counties themselves can get involved. Counties can get certified in the CSC program. A county counts as a municipality. So in some ways, because they operate at bigger scale, they can perhaps get to silver maybe quicker. Ulster is silver, for example. Dutchess is bronze. I know that the Columbia Board of Supervisors is passed a resolution back in November to become a climate smart community as a county and to work towards bronze. So, but green, Margaret, I don't think is doing anything.
Green is hopeless. at present.
Well, hopefully they'll get there. But yeah, so this is, I just mentioned county because I think it's actually a really interesting sweet spot when it comes to climate change work, where they can, they can kind of do things at an economy of scale and help support all of these smaller municipalities that are under resourced, that are within their district. So anyways, just keep an eye on counties. I urge you all to look up your legislators and see, if they are pro-climate officials. I also want to mention our First Nations. I didn't know this, but there are actually Native American reservations in New York State. None of them are within our local champions program area. But I think it's important to see where they are. And from your land acknowledgement homework, you may have already seen that I linked up a map where you can research ancestral homelands of different tribes. And as I mentioned in the land acknowledgement that we did in August, for me, the Stockbridge Munsee Native Americans were in this area here in the Red Hook, Rhinebeck area, forcibly relocated first to Massachusetts, then to Wisconsin, but present day trying to come back and trying to have more of an influence on how we work with the land here. So I thought that was interesting to also see that there were indeed reservations in New York State. Okay, next we have cities. Guess which city this is? This is New York City and its organizational chart. Thank goodness none of you local champs are from New York City. This is pretty crazy, right? A lot of complexity there. So, again, revisiting this question of why are we so concerned about municipal government with climate smart communities? Your local government has the power to oversee a lot of resources, land use, policy, and as well as its own, operations of its fleet, of its running the electricity for its wastewater power plant, etc. So here's where we get down into more detail of how your local government that you all are working with, how they work. So let's start with towns. By the way, hamlets are clusters of density within a town. They're considered part of the town government. They don't have their own level of government, but villages do. So at the town level, you have various departments. This is just a template that I created with maybe some typical departments. Yours might be different. And in fact, your homework will be to take this template and customize it and kind of create your own town or village org chart. I've included here, for example, the highway department. Let's say your town has a transfer station or a recycling center and a parks department. And these may be departments that you should know about. For instance, if you're going to do a greenhouse gas inventory, you'll need to know about highway department vehicles. How many vehicles do they have? What's their gas mileage? What kind of fuel do they burn, for example? And then for a town, you have you have this kind of structure of government in terms of elected and appointed officials. So in a town, you typically have a town supervisor and then a town board. And they are sometimes elected to 2, sometimes 4-year terms. Usually the elections are in November for town. But whether it's 2 or 4-year terms, I think that's up to the local municipality. So that's not standard. Typically you have a town board council person who serves as a liaison to these different departments and these different boards and committees. And chairs and members of these boards and committees are usually appointed by the town board and supervisor. And an official committee member usually is more like a 5 to 7-year term. Again, that's up to the local municipality, how long those terms are. I've included here the CAB, or Conservation Advisory Board. Sometimes that's a CAC, Conservation Advisory Council or Committee. Not all towns have these, but sometimes have a CAB or CAC, and is often then a jumping off point for a climate smart communities task force. And I think this is just kind of organically happens because often the Conservation Advisory Board or Council is made up of people who care about the environment and who are civically minded and already volunteering. So that's often becomes kind of like the home base, even if the CSC task force kind of juts off as its own task force. So the difference between CAB and CACs is a bit technical. A CAB has the authority to really make recommendations to the town board, whereas if it's just a conservation advisory committee or council, maybe it can make recommendations and do research, but they don't have as much as their recommendations don't carry as much weight, whereas a board is a bit more official. So in the slide notes, I also have a link here to kind of a fact sheet, a helper doc to help explain how CACs and CABs work and what the difference is. So I'll share that with you after the presentation as well. Towns usually have a whole range of committees, and it depends really on the particular town and, you know, the hot topics of the town or their needs. And then how active their volunteers are, right? Versus how active their officials are. And so usually the CSC task force would typically sit here among these other committees. Okay, but some towns, as I mentioned, have their CSC more like embedded within their CAB or kind of like an offshoot of the CAB. But that's kind of where CSC fits within this whole org chart of a town. Any Schitt's Creek fans out there? So extra in New York State that we have village government. It's an extra hyper-local level of government that New York State has that most other states don't have. A village is an area within a town that typically, again, has that higher population density. A hamlet is like a village, but doesn't have the extra government. A village has incorporated to form a government typically because it's providing additional resources to its residents that it needs to tax for and it needs to run and manage. So if you live in a village, you live within 3 municipalities: the village, town, and county. The village is always within a town. Towns are always within a county. Fun fact, in Connecticut, they neither have county nor village levels of government. They just have town and state. Pretty different. So for those of you in the villages, it's similar to a town in that it has these different departments, you know, as like, for example, building, planning, or zoning department. It might have additional extra departments depending on municipal services that are located in the village. So for example, a wastewater treatment plant or municipal water treatment plant, police department, fire department. And then the other major difference is whereas towns have a town supervisor, villages have a mayor, and villages have a board of trustees. The mayor and the trustees are elected usually for 2-year terms, but again, that depends on the municipality. It may be 4-year term. And similarly with a town, there's different boards that are appointed for terms by the board of trustees. And there may again be some variation in the titles here. I think I was looking at Catskill. They have some different nomenclature for their village. So it's really interesting because New York State is what we call a home rule state, that municipalities have a lot of flexibility to kind of run their own show. So it can get a bit complicated in that way, but everything is very localized. Then within a village, you probably, as with towns, have a bunch of committees. And again, it depends on the particular village, how many committees, how specific, what their activities are. But again, the CSC task force usually sits here as one of these committees. And I'm not sure about this, but I think typically villages don't have their own CAC or CAB in addition to a town CAB, CAC. So, because CSC is this municipal program, you need to have a login portal for each level and a filing for each level. So that's why, we have Melissa from the town of Kinderhook. We have Bill and Meg, each working on a village, which is located within the town of Kinderhook. And in my experience, the cooperation between the town and village, it varies. There are some climate smart communities actions that really make sense to do together jointly. For instance, natural resources inventory. This is one that I just worked on that was joint between the town and the village. And it made sense, right? Because natural habitats and watersheds don't necessarily follow the boundaries between town and village. So there's a lot of shared resources there. But when you're, just keep in mind that when you're doing a CSC action for points for certification, they're going to want you to show that both municipalities have skin in the game and that you're working closely together, that you're both active, and if there's budget, that you're both contributing to the budget for the action. That way, neither municipality is seen as like a quote unquote freeloader on the project. That's how you would both get points for doing one combined action. In some villages, the mayor oversees police and fire departments. To give you an example, the town is almost like a client of those services, where the town is probably allocating some budget to pay the village to manage the police and fire departments and for coverage in the town territory, even though the village is in charge of those departments. So that's another way that resources are shared across the town and village municipality. And then sometimes a town and a village can come together and decide to consolidate a department. So for instance, in Rhinebeck, we did a study to see if our town highway department and our village highway department should actually be combined and just be one greater municipal department. We were also looking at that because right now we have a town court and we have a village court, and it seems redundant. Could that just be one department? Again, your homework for this week will be to take a template that I've shared with you and create your own org chart, do some research to better understand how your own municipality is structured. So with that, that's the end of part 1. Okay, welcome back. There is a lot more to learn. So in the second part of our Civics 101, we're going to talk about the processes, specifically about how you work at the local level with your government. There's many, many layers, but we're going to keep it down at your local level for this second half. Still could be overwhelming, so I'm going to try to keep it simple, just provide some examples, and then we can have some Q&A at the end. We're going to basically get into how the sausage gets made at the local level. And why is this important? If you're new to working with municipal government, you may found it a very confusing experience when you don't know how to get from point A to point B with your project, with your climate smart project. And for those of you who have been working with local government, I'm sure you can attest to that. It's a bit of a learning curve. And with over 100 actions in the Climate Smart Communities program, it can also be overwhelming because they seem kind of different. They seem maybe all over the place. There are different sorts of actions in the Climate Smart Communities program. And so I'm not even going to cover all the different types of them, but today we're going to talk through these 4 types. There's policies, there's capital projects meaning more like they involve construction where you're actually building something or repairing something or redesigning something or working with infrastructure or buying a piece of equipment. That's what I mean by capital projects, an investment in your infrastructure. And then some are just like gathering data and reporting. And then some are straight up outreach and education with your communities. So we're going to be talking about how you go about doing these, how you get them done. So we're going to start with policy and how that works with your kind of local legislature, which is your town board or your board of trustees for the village. I'm going to take a step back and start with kind of like the mama policy of them all, which is your comprehensive plan. This is really kind of like the meta document for your town or your village. And a piece of homework that you'll be doing is actually researching whether your town or village has a comprehensive plan. Not all in New York State do, though it's very much recommended. Here's the description of what a comprehensive plan is according to the Climate Smart Communities, because, and again, I'll share these slides so you can go back in detail and read this definition, but it's comprehensive in that it's meant to cover all sorts of issues from housing to transportation to economic development to civic engagement. And we would say also how all of those things relate to climate change. And a comprehensive plan with sustainability elements is a climate smart communities action in and of itself. So keep that in the back of your mind. Again, a comp plan is a big deal. It's a lot of work. And because it involves research and outreach to the community, surveys, focus groups, talking to a lot of stakeholders, and because it's meant to be comprehensive, that takes time. It's a lot of work. Typically, a comp plan is done maybe once every 10 years, though oftentimes it goes much longer than that. In that, here in Rhinebeck, our village comp plan was last done in the 90s. So, but the point is, when you have the opportunity to update it, let's get those sustainability elements in there. And let's talk about how all the different aspects of our lives are now touched by climate change. What a comp plan does is it makes then a series of, it compiles all this research and outreach, and usually like a values and visioning process that it does with residents. And then it makes a whole host of recommendations for policies that then your village or town board should pursue and codify into law. Look at PE 6. There's an action called Comprehensive Plan with Sustainability Elements. And so there's a way to get, pretty major points for integrating sustainability and climate change into your comp plan. So just a little reminder here, if you go to the CSC website to this map, you can filter by action and you can pull up other municipalities that have gotten points for doing this comp plan with sustainability elements. And you can go and you can check out their comp plans. You can go then to their websites, find their comprehensive plans and see how they did it. What sorts of actions were they recommending in their comp plan? And how were they integrating climate and sustainability into their comp plan? Some towns and villages really integrate it throughout a comp plan, whereas some will be like, okay, our comp plan is fine. Let's just add an addendum with climate specific actions recommended and kind of like tack it on as an appendix or an addendum. So there's different ways of going about it as well. But yeah, if your comp plan is 20 years old, it might be time to kind of rip the whole thing open and have at it.
Is there a guidebook or anything like that from the state or anywhere to how to do a comprehensive plan and what a comprehensive plan should be like?
Yeah, you can check out these resources that are recommended through the Climate Smart Communities program. Another great resource for this sort of thing is Pace University. They have a whole program in land use, and they no doubt have resources related to comprehensive plans. Pace University. So
PACE?
yes, PACE. Okay, so say you have a comp plan, there's recommendations in the comp plan for then the town or the village to make certain policies, make certain laws. And, you can, so say you have then an action from Climate Smart Communities, that's a policy, right? So some of the actions in Climate Smart Communities is do this or that policy, get this or that policy passed. It could be that your comp plan will make maybe not like a specific recommendation. For example, like say you wanted to pass a fleet efficiency policy. Most comp plans aren't going to specifically have a recommendation that the town or village should pass a fleet efficiency policy, probably not. But the comp plan might say stuff about ensuring the health and safety of the residents, or reducing pollution, or something about clean air, clean water, or some such. And so what I'm trying to express to you is that if you are coming out of your certification assessments and you have a certain number of policies that you want to recommend that the board, pursue, it really behooves you to ground that recommendation in a foundation of like, this is how it relates to the comp plan, or this is how it relates to our climate goals now that we've passed a resolution saying we want to be a climate smart community. Giving your town or village board that context, that this policy is coming from a place that is already researched, it's precedent because other towns or villages have passed it, that was really going to help them, and it helps ensure that the policy is a good idea, and gives them some, I don't know, just makes them trust that it does relate to the overall values and goals of your municipality. So it's always a great idea if you can read your comp plan, be familiar with it, and have an eye out for, how can I interpret this as relating to climate goals? And as I said, if some of your comp plans are a bit older, that language might not be in there. I would love for you all to read your comp plans and see if it even mentions climate change, but hopefully it will at least have some mention of the environment and healthy, clean air, clean water. So yeah, and the great thing with Climate Smart Communities, as relates to policy, you don't have to start from scratch. The nice thing about climate smart communities is they often provide you with examples and guidance about how to draft policy or ordinances. Again, you can go to the list of actions on the climate smart communities map and filter by action. And so you can also pull up the PDF for each of these actions and check out the resources that they provide. So you oftentimes you don't have to start completely from scratch. You could look up other municipalities that have done the action and then literally copy their policy and then customize it for your own municipality. So for example, let's say you're trying to get a fleet efficiency policy passed, you could copy it from another municipality that's done that, then adapt it. So it really, you want to customize it so it makes sense for your own town or village, but it's totally okay. It's not like you're plagiarizing. Think of, laws like this as kind of open source. And then, so the next step, as Margaret teed me up here, is determining whether this policy can be adopted just by resolution, or do you need to create or change a local law? So let's start with what a resolution is. And this is that legal document that you may have, you may have seen on writing, or you may have heard when you're at a board meeting. This is the resolution number such and such, whereas the village or town has done this, and whereas the village or town thinks that this or that is important, now therefore be it resolved that we will pass this policy, blah, blah, blah. So the format here with the whereas, and now therefore be it resolved is really, this is the legal language of how a board functions. It describes the rationale for their decision. So that's what the whereas is about. It's providing like the reasons for why you're bringing this forward as something to be voted on. And then if the board votes on it, if it passes, then the resolution is adopted. Just has to pass by majority. And the function of this is really, it forces the government, your local government, it forces clarity on their decisions. So they have to be very clear about what exactly they're agreeing to, and then they vote on it. So, and once it's voted on, it's entered into the official public record, and therefore for the rest of history, the public will see that in the year 2022, that my town passed the resolution authorizing the fleet efficiency policy. And it's then entered into the public record and made official. So that's how you do it through resolution. Now, if it needs to be a new law or adapting an existing law, that's often, the law is often referred to as the code, right? The village code or the town code. It's kind of the compendium of local laws. If it's creating or amending a local law, that requires a few more hoops that the board will need to jump through. So you'll need the board to publicly notice, so give a public notification that it intends to vote on this new local law, and then have that up for review and comment by the public for a certain period of time. And then it needs to host a public hearing where the public can come and give comment. And then if anything needs to be, changed, the board can do that. And then finally, the board can pass a resolution to adopt the new local law, if all goes well. And so determining whether something can be done just by resolution or whether it needs to go through this local law process, that's definitely something you would need to discuss with your board. And also probably they would ask their village or town attorney, because if it is in fact needing to go through the local law route, then the municipality's attorney would be involved in drafting the code and literally making sure it's up to snuff, making sure it's literally up to code. So that's just a little bit about how that all works when you're trying to get a policy passed. Thought this would be helpful to share with you an example of a timeline of how long this took and what the steps were. This is from the mayor of Hastings-on-Hudson, Nikki Armacost. She shared with us that she passed the New York Stretch Code, and that involved a local law. So you can see here, she brought it to the board, but probably first went one by one to different board members and discussed it, aired out any questions or concerns, talked about, it's important to talk about something, a big change like this with the stakeholders to get buy-in. And then she went through those steps of the public comment period, the public hearing, working with the lawyer to make sure that everything is drafted just so. And then finally had a vote on it. To be honest, the timeline that she shared here is pretty fast for a local law. And I think part of that had to do with her skill as a mayor, kind of whipping the votes behind the scene and getting everybody on board for this change. But I think it also had to do with the fact that she wasn't starting from scratch. She got this local law basically as a template through NYSERDA, through the CEC program, and then just had to kind of tweak it and customize it for her own village. But again, with CEC, CSC policies and laws like this, you're not starting from scratch. So it's a big leg up. The point here is this is her story of how it worked in her municipality. And again, illustrating the point that not every town or village has the same exact committees or different groups, but you should have a building inspector that you would want to get buy-in from. But my point here is to think about, okay, who's got a vested interest in the policy that you're trying to pass, and make sure you approach them, have a sit down with them, talk it through with them, and hear their questions and concerns before you bring it up all the way to like a public hearing. And then by then, whomever it is who may have had small concerns is now upset that they weren't consulted. There's a bit of behind the scenes, making sure that you're having those conversations before it even gets to, say, a public hearing or a vote before the board. Okay, as with so much in life, it often comes down to the money. So I wanted you all to be aware, as a very important aspect of the process here of how the sausage gets made, the budget cycles. So typically town budget, town fiscal year starts in January. So think about their budget season where they're having meetings and hashing it all out is in the fall. With the village, typically fiscal year starts in June. So you want to be hashing things out in the spring. Check piece of your homework, check when your budget cycle is, and make sure you have a read on how those meetings proceed, and whether you could sit in on them. It's really interesting to see where the money comes in from for a village or a town, and then how it gets sliced up and allocated. So typically villages and towns have different funds. So the taxes come in, other sources of revenue, such as, just a couple mentioned here. You could also think of like fees coming in for building permits. There's different sources of revenue that come into the village in addition to taxes. But then those are allocated to different funds. If you have a municipal water system or wastewater system, those might be self-funded because they are charging bills of their users, of their customers. But so there's these funds, right, that serve the different departments. And then under those funds, you have specific lines in those Excel spreadsheets where the money is very specifically earmarked to costs and projects and staff. So it's really a good thing to have in mind when you're going to try to get a CSC project, get it rolling. Which line item does it already relate to an existing budget, or are you asking for a new line in the budget? to fund a project that you want to do. You have to be planning ahead. So I'll say this once, it's very hard to get a CSC project underway if you have not planned for it in advance as part of the budget cycle. Let me say it again. It's very hard to get your project moving forward, if it hasn't been planned for and budgeted for in advance. And it can seem like it's a long wait because budgeting comes but once a year, typically for villages and towns. There may be some wiggle room. If it's a low ticket item, maybe you could slip it in if there's an excess in your budget. But particularly for these large projects, you really need to think about that budget cycle and getting them as part of the conversation in budget negotiations in advance. So another piece of homework for you will be to look up your town or village's procurement policy. Usually there's a procurement policy that lays out by law the thresholds that the board has to follow when it comes to making purchases or capital investments. So this is just an example for me here on this slide. Yours, I want to see if yours are different. But those lower ticket items, you might just need approval from a member of the board or from the department head. Then there's usually like a middle tranche where you might need board approval to spend money. And then finally, if it's a large project, usually you have to go out for public bid if it's over a certain threshold. And the process there, again, is a bit drawn out, but the whole point is to prevent officials from giving kickbacks to their cronies. So the way it works is you would put out an RFP publicly notice, and an RFP is a request for proposals. And then the board would have a certain time frame where that RFP is publicly out there, and vendors or companies can then bid on it within a certain time frame. You want to try to get at least 3 bids, so you're doing your due diligence to try to get the best price, and then the board votes to accept one of the bids, usually the best lowest cost. And so this is just, it's just good to have this all the money stuff in the back of your head as you're going and making decisions about which projects for your climate smart actions you really want to push for, and make sure you're planning in advance. So things like, my point here, again, make sure you know which, for your action that you, or your project you want to put forward, does it relate back to a particular department and fund? Who oversees that? Who on the board is the liaison? So say, for instance, you want to do bike lanes, that might relate to your highway department. They're in charge of the streets. Okay, which person on your board is the liaison who oversees the highway department? Let's look at how their budget is doing. And let's talk to them in advance about getting money allocated for new bike lanes. And then try to make sure you're on the timeline for that. So an example here, when it comes to a capital project, again, this is something that's kind of big, probably expensive. You probably want to start with an assessment. Okay, so let's say you have a spot along the road that's more frequently flooding due to climate change. Let's say you take a step back and you want to look at what's causing that flooding. So maybe you end up doing a large scale culvert and dam assessment. This is something that you can actually get points for in and of itself, just doing the assessment. Okay. And then next, you typically want to take that assessment, analyze it, and figure out with a plan, okay, where are the highest priority places, culverts that we say want to right size? And you make a plan. This is probably also where you put together an estimated budget. You might hire an engineer to come in and do this for you. Again, you're getting board approval, passing a resolution at each step of the way, authorizing this. And then let's say you put together a management plan. You can get points just for that. And then finally, you actually can go and do your capital project, a construction project, and go out for, with the RFP, get the bid, and actually start building. So my point here is, like, this might seem like a long drawn out process with a lot of steps, but again, you're using taxpayer money. So you want to be accountable to that. You want to make sure that you're using your money most wisely. And the other thing is, yes, it's a drawn out process with a lot of steps, but you're kind of chunking it out in a way that gives your board the ability to plan for the expenditure of the money, to budget for it, to apply for grants if you're going to be going for them to help with the project. So that's how like a capital project might run. A data reporting project, generally there are CSC actions that are designed to help you better understand an issue. This is designed to help you research. And then the reporting is often a piece that is about transparency. It's about showing the public the progress that your municipality has made in regards to a topic. So for example, the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, even though that might be something that you can do in-house with volunteers, you don't have to hire a consultant or something, maybe you do, but say you don't, it's still important to get buy-in from your board and make sure you're getting a resolution passed documenting that you're authorized to do this project. And that's good practice, but it's also because you might be using, say, your municipal staff's time to help you with it. And so you want to make sure you're getting approval for that in advance. So say you're asking your bookkeeper or your clerk for all the energy bills for the past 2 years, you want to make sure that that's approved beforehand before you make that ask. And it's just great to get a resolution to make it publicly announced as well. And then finally, outreach and education projects. These are kind of the most fun, in my opinion, because you get to interact with the public. A lot of climate smart communities is about municipal operations and their properties, and it can be a bit dry. So this is fun because you actually get to engage with the public. And it's great because you have this opportunity in your role as the climate smart communities coordinator, and you can educate and inspire the public and really give a helping hand to your community when it comes to what they should be informed about with climate change, and help to spur them to take action in their own lives. So one example could be, say, for instance, a climate vulnerability assessment. Sometimes these CSC actions actually require that you build in public engagement into a larger action. So this one, for example, you'd be doing a lot of research, bringing in experts and data sets and looking at maps and stuff like that, but you don't want to just rely on that research in a vacuum. This action also requires that you host public engagement sessions and do outreach, say maybe do a survey. So that's one way in which your outreach and education is kind of built into some of these actions. Whereas with other actions, it's about community engagement in and of itself, with the waste reduction education campaign, for example. And again, these actions should also be planned for in advance and be approved by your board. But because you can often run them with volunteers, you might not be asking for money, and therefore there's not as much of a process. Okay, so before I stop sharing my screen, I do also want to just show you where the homework is going to be. And then we can, if we have time, if people can stay, we can do a little Q&A. So do you see here where it says homework?
Yep.
Yeah, so you click on that, and then here's your homework for this session. When you click on the org chart and when you click on the worksheet, if you're signed into your Google, into your Gmail, when you click on this, it's going to open up the document, and you'll see a button that says copy. You click that button to copy the template, and it's going to save a copy of it in your Google Drive. Okay, and then you can always move it. You can go back to the Google tutorial that I did, and move it, organize it within your folders. But just a heads up that these are kind of like these Google Drive templates that I've made for you that then you can customize for your own. All right, have a good week, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, all.
See you all later.
Bye.